My name is Lee Adcock, and today I'll be walking you through the process of creating the MoleMasher game using AppInventor. MoleMasher is a fun game where a mole jumps around on the screen and the user interacts by trying to touch the mole to increase their score. To get started, we're going to drag components over to the screen, and then we're going to go over to the blocks editor to change how they behave and define how the user interacts with our game. So to start, I'm going to go to the media palette, make that drawing and animation, and I'm going to pick out a canvas and drag that to the screen. On our canvas, we're going to use what's called sprites. A sprite is a graphic that can move and we can interact with, and that AppInventor provides us a lot of flexibility and automation about how it's managed on the screen. So things like rotating and bouncing, positioning, are all things that AppInventor can handle for us using a sprite that's placed on a canvas. Below that, I'm going to put a label for our score, a button, and then we're going to want some sound. So I'm going to go down to Media and drag over a sound widget. And I'm also going to go to Sensors and grab a clock. The clock allows us to control events based on time. So it's going to be important to keeping the timing, keep the game moving forward. As always, we're going to want to rename our components to make things easy to find and recognize once we start using the blocks. So for the canvas, I'm going to rename it to Mole Field Canvas. This is the field that our mole will be running around on. The image sprite will become the mole image. I'm going to rename label to score label. We're renaming button to reset button. The sound will become mole hit sound. And I'll rename clock to mole movement clock. So with that done, we'll go through each of our components and we're going to set the default properties for how they'll look and appear on the screen when the game starts up. So for the canvas, I'm going to set the background color to green to represent the field that the moles are running around on. And I'm going to set the height and width to fill parent. Just like with most of our applications that we create, we're going to want it to grow to fill the whole screen, regardless of the size of the device or its orientation. For the mole image, I'm going to choose a picture. In this case, I've already downloaded and have on my machine ready a picture for our mole. There it is, mole. Perfect. Realize I made a mistake here on our canvas. It's not the paint color that I meant to change, it's the background color. There we go. So now we have our green field with our mole sitting right in the middle of it, or up in the corner. All right, from there, I'm going to go to the score label, and I'm just going to change the text for now to say score colon. Once we start developing the logic, we'll be dynamically changing this text to include the score. Mole hit sound. I'm going to change the source. And just like I had a mole image, I've also got a sound that I'm going to be using. So I'll add that. The reset button, I'll change the text to say reset. And then for my clock, I want the game to proceed at an interval of every 500 milliseconds, or every half second. And we can change this around to make our game easier or harder. once we decide what we like. All right, so with that done, we've pretty much got the whole user interface defined. And now we can move on to the blocks to define the logic behind our application. So you'll notice we had a score, so it makes sense then that we're probably going to want a variable to put that score in. So I'll go to variable, and I'll say initialize global, and I'll call it score. And then it needs a default value for when the application starts. So I'll use the value 0. Now, one of the things that's really handy to use for this application are procedures. Procedures are a way for us to define our own blocks of code that we can either reuse in multiple places or just to kind of break out the logic so that the blocks in our code don't just grow too large. So I can separate them out and make it easier to read and understand what's going on. So I'm going to start off by creating a new procedure called moleMove. And all my logic for moving my mole during the course of my game, I'll put here, which will make it really easy for me to call elsewhere uh, when I'm ready for my mole to start jumping around on the screen. So the way I'll do that is I'm going to start off by actually making the mole jump to different x and y coordinates on the screen. So just like when you're thinking back to algebra and math, the entire screen has an x-axis across the top and a y across the side. Now this isn't quite like the normal quadrants that you're used to, where in this case 0, 0 is up here in the left corner, and x increases as we go to the right, and y increases as we go to the bottom. It seems a little bit backwards for those that are familiar and often using math, but the reason is think back to early screens where it was all characters, and you were defining the row and column of the character, except now we're using pixels instead. So for my blocks editor, I'm going to go and select the mole image, and you'll notice that it has properties for x and y. So I want to use a random value that spans from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen. So I'm going to go to math, oops, and there's conveniently a random integer block. And I'll say that I want it to go from 0 to the width of the screen. And I can get the width dynamically by looking at the mole field canvas and grabbing the width property. And I'll do the same thing for y with the height. Using a random integer between 0 and the mole field canvas's height. So each time this procedure is called, the mole is going to randomly jump around on the screen. And if I go over to procedures, I can see now that I have a block that says call mole move. I can drop that wherever I want to in my logic to make the mole move around. If I go look at my clock, you'll see that I have a timer object or timer event that gets fired at the interval that we defined earlier. So every 500 milliseconds, or twice a second, I can call my procedure to make the mole jump around on the screen. Now with this done, at this point I could put this app onto my phone and I could see the mole jumping all over the place. The next step is to manage how do I do something with my score so that when I actually touch the mole, I can have my score increase. If I go down to Mole Image, you'll see there's lots of different events that can get fired depending on things happening with how I'm interacting with my sprite and how my sprite's interacting with the other sprites or the canvas itself. For me, I'm just going to use when my mole image is touched. So when someone uses their finger and is able to successfully grab the mole before he has a chance to move. There are a number of things that I want to happen when I touch the mole. I want to increase my score. I want to play the sound that I defined earlier. I want to update the little label so that it shows the new score and number. And then I want to immediately move the mole. To do the score first, I'm going to set the global score to the sum of the current score plus 1. And then I'm going to want to update the label itself. So I'll go over to score label. I'll be setting the text. I'm going to join two different text strings together this time, both the score colon text and the new score number. So to do that, I'm going to go up to text and I'm going to use a join. Starts off with score and a space. And then I'm going to get the value of my score variable. And together those will go in the text. Now one thing I could consider doing here is starting to move complicated pieces of logic out into their own procedures. It's really easy to do. Create another procedure. This one I'll call update score label. I can pull this logic out and just call it like that. This way later, if I'm going back to make changes or looking at what happens when the mole is touched, it's very clear without having to walk through a large number of blocks. The next step would be playing the sound. Mole hit sound, play. Also, I'm going to want a little bit of a vibration to make my game a little interesting. If I go to mole hit sound, I can also choose to vibrate. And I'm going to drop a number of milliseconds as an input. So maybe we'll vibrate for a quarter of a second. Once again, it's simple to pull some of this out into a procedure. So why don't I call this one mole hit sound? We'll handle playing the sound and doing the vibration. So far when I've touched it, I'm increasing the score, I'm updating the score label, I'm playing a sound, and the last thing I want to do is immediately move the mole, which is easy to do now that I have a procedure that does just that. So now my score is taken care of, I can play my game. The only piece that's missing at this point is resetting the score when I'm ready to start again. So if I go over to the reset button, I'll choose click. When that happens, I want to set the score. So I'm going to get the variable for the score, and I'm going to set it back to 0. Now that I've updated the number, I also need to update the label. Luckily, I already have a procedure for that, which I can just drop in place, and it's ready to work. So with that done, I've created the whole application. My mole will jump around on the screen. I can try to touch him. If I do, my score increases. I get a sound and a vibration. And when I'm ready to start over, I have a reset button. That's the complete app. Thanks for coding with me.